welcome back to the Possum Creek Radio Show. This is episode 5. I'm Ernie of Possum Creek Knifeworks. I keep thinking, episode 5. We've been doing this for 5 weeks. Where's that 5 weeks gone? It's been sort of an interesting start to the summer here. The knife shop's doing really good. We've picked up the business quite a bit. I'm getting some custom orders in that are really helping out, and just a regular steady flow of sales from stuff on the online shop. I'm actually falling behind in putting new stuff out there. I got a few new items this week that will go up on the show, or go up on the website, and we're getting to where we're doing more custom work. I like that. The other stuff sort of fills in, and it's just sort of what I want to do, but I like doing custom work because that's making a knife specific to a customer. My wife and I were talking a couple of days ago, and I was wondering out loud why the limited edition stuff is not really gaining much interest. I had thought that might be a pretty good deal, and she's like, no, not really. She said the novelty of a small knife shop is that you can call or email the guy and describe what you want and have him make it for you. The type of blade, the type of wood, whatever design you want on it. And as she pointed out, when you can do custom work like that, every knife is a limited edition. So why would you want a limited edition of somebody else's knife when you can get a limited edition of something specifically that you want and have it be absolutely unique? So I had to concede her point. She's often the better, wiser businessman of the two. But custom orders are flowing in. I've got quite a bit there. I've got some newer projects going on. We're making some big knives and some swords, sort of medieval fantasy type stuff, and that's a lot of fun. That is a lot of fun to make that sort of thing. But the farm's doing great too. Lack of water, still a problem, but we're just muddling on. We're pretending like we're not worried about that, and it's coming. The rains will come in the fall, I guess, and like they do every year, but we're just going to have a hard summer without it. But we're eating well out of the garden. Garden's just really blooming. I'm going to talk about garden for quite some time later on in the show. It's a good thing. We're doing quite well around here, and I hope you guys are doing well where you're at, too. May the Lord shine and bless you all. So let's get on with the show. Well, the garden is still hanging in there. We've still got some water, so I'm still gardening. We're getting a little low on the water, but everything's pretty much coming in well. I'm pretty pleased. The zucchini has really been a blessing. Everybody always says, I don't like to plant zucchini. It overproduces. Yeah, so what? We're eating zucchini for dinner every night. It's not our only dish, but usually we'll have a little bit of chicken and a whole lot of zucchini, or some fried eggs and some zucchini. And that's keeping us fed. So I really do not believe in overproduction. I guess it's overproduction if you don't like it, but we like it well enough, and we don't get really tired of it. Okra's coming in fits and spurts. We have okra probably 2 to 3 nights a week. Wish we had enough for okra, zucchini, tomatoes, and everything else on one big dish every night, but it just doesn't work out that way. Zucchini, you can get pretty much every day, but generally the other stuff kind of filters in every 2 days, every 3 days, depending upon its production rate. Kind of the standing joke around here is, what are we going to have for dinner tonight with our zucchini? I don't care. I like zucchini. The plant spacing I did this year was just too dense. I needed less density in my plant spacing. I don't know why I did it that way. I guess I was very optimistic that we'd have so much water that we could just dump on everything and it wouldn't matter that my plants were 18 inches apart. Well, if you've ever seen some of these squash plants, they can be 3 feet in diameter, so they're crowded. And when they're crowded, they don't do well. They end up getting stunted, they don't produce as much, etc. You can tell the difference in some of the zucchini that's planted in different spots that doesn't have any real competition, well, it's going like gangbusters. It looks like, you could just about crawl up underneath them leaves and live. Another problem that we're having right now is bugs. The grasshoppers are eating everything. Plus, we got these other little bugs. I don't even know what they are, but they've come in, and they're eating the tomatoes just live right on the plants. And I've never seen them before. They're not a hornworm. They're a little type of gray beetle. Little internet search I did for them was fairly fruitless. And they stink. They're not a stink bug. They're just some sort of gray beetle. They almost look like a firefly, just without the fire and the fly part. But they sort of just sit down there at the base of the plant, and they nibble on the tomatoes. They don't really eat the leaves or anything else, but they like the ripe tomatoes. And I've been sprinkling DE pretty liberally lately. Normally I try to conserve it a little bit for only the impacted plants, but the other day I went and used the whole bucket because I figured that if I didn't go ahead and use it now, I wouldn't have anything to put my DE on later. But it doesn't seem to be phasing either the grasshoppers or the beetles. I'm not sure what that's about. Grasshoppers are just overrunning us. There's crazy big grasshoppers in the garden, and they've eaten down 2 of the fruit trees, the young fruit trees that I planted last year and this year. And just about any new plants that I put in, I try to plant all year long, and the newer squash and zucchini and cucumbers and everything else that I'm planting, just as fast as it goes into the ground, these grasshoppers come along and eat it. And there ain't much else for them to eat. It's brown and desiccated around here. I heard on the radio this morning that our rainfall to date is 9.22 inches. Now, we don't get a lot of rain, but our average yearly rainfall is 24 inches. So for us to only have 9 inches and the year be half over, we're suffering. Normally, our big rains come in January, February, and March, and we got nothing. And there's nothing in the forecast. It's 102 degrees here every day now, and there's no rain in the forecast. I think every show so far we've done, this will be our 5th show, and every show y'all get to hear me complain about the lack of rain. And some of y'all may be wondering, boy, if it's really that bad there in Texas, why do you move back? Well, there's a lot of other places, but I guess if you're from Texas, you'll get it. Texas is Texas. There ain't no place like Texas. I also believe that these places that are hard to live, they attract a certain type of person, a person that is harder and more resilient. And if I'm going to have neighbors, I want hard and resilient neighbors. I don't want people who like easy living. And I've noticed that in the places where they do like easy living, they vote in a certain type of law. There's a certain type of politics there. And I don't fit in well with there. I don't like the government telling me what to do. I don't like anybody else telling me what to do. And easy living places are filled with people who don't have nothing better to do than to tell you what to do. Whereas them hard to get by places like, the Ozarks and Idaho up in the mountains there, or the deserts of Arizona, or here in west central Texas, those sort of places, pretty much everybody's too busy minding their own living, trying not to die, to really get too much in your business. And I like that. I like that in a folk. But the rain will come. We're not under some biblical punishment, I don't think. The rain will come. We'll get by. We may have to cut down the minimal things, go bare minimum on a lot of our lifestyle aspects. Showers may get pretty scarce. I'm having to shower just about every day now. Normally I'm a once every 4 to 5 day shower guy, which is strange because when I was in the city and we were hooked up to the grid, heck, I'd get up in the morning and take a shower, and then of an evening I'd take another shower. And here I just don't have the water, and there's somewhat of a rigmarole to get the shower set up. and so I don't shower that heavily. But I've been doing different stuff in the knife shop. So you may have seen some of the bare metal that I've been grinding out as swords and daggers and that sort of thing. And you get covered in metal shavings. I'm out here and I work in a pair of shorts and sandals, no shirt. Excuse me. And so I sweat a lot because it's hot and there's no air conditioning. And then when I sweat, all the sawdust and the metal shavings stick to me. And toward the end of the day, I'm starting to itch like crazy because I got metal grinding into my flesh. Even the kids won't come near me because they know I'm full of splinters and metal shards. So I just go and I sit and I shower off for a minute. And a shower for me, it's about 10 minutes, and I waste about 2 to 3 gallons of water. So most people, when they flush their toilet, they waste more money than I do when I shower. So it ain't really too big a deal, but still, it eats at me because we don't have a good collection methodology for the shower. The water just sort of runs over into a pit where there's a willow tree, but that willow tree ain't doing very good. Might be because of all the sweat running off of me when I shower. Anyhow, things are looking up though around here. The garden is really starting to pop. We're getting a lot of food. Chickens I don't know what has gone wrong with these chickens, but we've got more eggs than we can eat. We're actually having to force ourselves to eat extra eggs. And I thought about selling some, just put up a sign on the road, but it's not a great idea. I mean, if I sell food, it's going to put probably $2 to $3 in my pocket. And I don't think this economic area can support more than $2 to $3 in eggs. For a dozen. Nobody's going to buy that, and there's not a lot of traffic on my road anyway. And I don't know, it opens us up to other problems too. We're kind of back off the road in the woods, and I don't think a lot of people know what we're doing back here, and if they even know that we're here. And I just really don't want to invite them back in here. I like friends and family and visitors a lot. I really like showing off the farm and showing what we're doing here. And as y'all can see on the internet, I'm not particularly afraid of people learning how we live our life. But just people passing down the road who say, oh, that guy, let me go scout out his place, buy a $3 carton of eggs, see what he's got laying around to steal. It bothers me, just people stopping by for commerce. And there's also the economics of it. If I sell eggs, I get $3. All right, fine. That could have been tonight's dinner, and now I got to actually go buy tonight's dinner. I'm not going to go be able to buy tonight's dinner for $3, so I've actually lost money. It's better just to eat the eggs, especially when you can have them with delicious zucchini and tomatoes out of the garden. So, anyway, we're not going to be selling any eggs anytime soon. Honey might be a different thing, though. I got one hive left from the disaster 2 years ago in Illinois, and then when the move, that cut my population even more. And then when we started down here, we tried to ramp up the population, didn't have any success there either. So I'm down to one hive. I am one beehive away from being an ex-beekeeper. And this one hive, though, is really thriving. They're just going like gangbusters, and I like that. I've got a super on there. They're collecting honey. We've now kind of hit the dearth. There's a summer dearth here where there's not really much blooming, and the bees are going to have to eat some of their supplies. But I'm not going to collect any honey this year, I don't think. Certainly I won't collect enough to sell. I think I'm just going to I'm going to baby this one hive until next year, when I think I'll be more comfortable. It'll be a 2-year-old hive at that point, and I will be much more comfortable splitting it and propagating it and making more bees. Right now it's just sort of a starter colony, a nursing colony, and I'm going to use them, because they seem to have some pretty good genetics. I'm going to use them to propagate and fill up the bee yard. I got a swarm call a couple of days ago, 2 days ago, and it went pretty well. These bees were carnelian, and they were just sitting in a crepe myrtle tree about eye level at an apartment complex. And I got a friend here who's into all sorts of agriculture, and he's on the county extensions list and all that. And so he gets paid to remove the bees, and he calls a beekeeper, and the beekeeper gets to keep the bees. So it's a pretty good deal, pretty good bargain. And anyway, we went out there and we got the bees. I had to go out there twice, and it was somewhat of a pain. These bees were not cooperative at all. I'd put them in a box, and then they'd fly away. They'd go back to a branch, right back sort of near where they were. And then I'd put them all back in the box, and they'd go right back to the branch. And we were trying all the tricks. Put in a frame with some wax. We put in some of that lemon balm, and then we put in sugar water, and nothing was really working. They weren't interested. They liked their tree branch, and finally I just got frustrated, and I cut off the whole tree branch and brought the whole clump home with me in a bucket, a sealed bucket, put them in a hive, and they spent half the next day in that hive, and they ate up some of the surrounding food, and then off they went. They took off, a bunch of freeloaders. I have no idea where they are now. So I'm happy that there's now a new bee colony somewhere in my vicinity, but I'm unhappy that it is not actually in my hive growing and getting ready to produce me honey next year. But it was a fun experience, and I got a little cash too. My friend, he chipped me some of what he was getting paid for the bee removal job. So a little cash in my pocket, and I got the experience of collecting a swarm. I haven't done that in probably 2 years. I kind of sort of gave up on it when we were in Illinois because it was getting those swarm calls was just problematic. You'd have people call you, and there's bees all over my front porch. Come get them. You get there, and it's a wasp nest. It's not bees. And you're like, well, I just wasted a trip. And other times you get there, and the bees have eaten into their wall, and they're living up in their attic or something. Well, I'm not going to fix their wall. I'm not going to tear into their wall for one thing, because I don't want any liability. And I don't think too many people would say, yeah, I can get those bees out. Here, let me go get an axe out of my truck. I don't think they're going to let me cut open their wall, especially since I'm just going to walk away and not fix it. Most of the swarm calls were kind of useless, and you quiz people pretty carefully over the phone about it at first, but what you learned was that people are pretty ignorant when it comes to bees, and you wouldn't get good information at all. I remember one hive we went, and it was in Wisconsin, just over the border in Wisconsin, and we drove up there, and these bees were just hyper-aggressive, stinging everybody. They were at a truck stop up on a clump up on one of the fuel tanks. And anybody who would get close, anybody who stopped for gas, these bees would just go at them. And it was in August, which I thought was kind of late for bee swarms anyway, but turns out a bee truck had been going north for the blueberry fields for pollination, and they'd come up from Alabama or somewhere else with a load of bees, and these bees had escaped and gotten up top. Well, these bees were Africanized, and they had no business being transported at all. Somebody's practicing some very bad beekeeping. There wasn't a queen with that clump. It was just a bunch of escaped bees that clustered together and decided to sting people. And I didn't want them, so we had to walk away from that job. And the truck stop manager, he was all sorts of ticked off at us. But we're not getting paid for it. I can't do anything with a bunch of killer bees. I told him just go get a bottle of poison and spray them. I can't fix them. Heck, if I brought them back to my farm, they'd just propagate more, and I'd have nothing but killer bees, and probably fall afoul of the state somehow. So we had not an enormous amount of success up north with catching swarms. A little, but not great. And down here, this is my first swarm call, so I was excited, and it was fun to see. Too bad it didn't pan out like I wanted, but not everything in life does. So I'm ready for my next swarm call, and we'll see what happens. I've been using a lot of raw steel in the workshop lately. Now, most of the knife blades that you see up on Etsy and whatnot, the majority of those are purchased blades. They're stainless steel, which I can't really work with. They're high carbon blades that have come from some factory shop somewhere. And I get them and I can modify them and put a handle on them and design the handle. Basically, I can take the blade and make it my own, but I don't really have a lot of input into the stylistic stuff of the blade. So lately I've been getting raw steel of various qualities and working with that as kind of a side. I'm trying to break into this other market of fantasy reenactors, medieval type people who like swords and big daggers and that sort of thing. And because it's more lucrative. I mean, a hunting knife is $60-$70, and a sword, which granted will take me about twice as long to produce as a hunting knife, but a sword can go anywhere between $150 and $500, depending upon the quality of it. Now, I'm certainly my skill at sword making is still down in the $150 price range, but I didn't make very good knives when I first started doing it either. So in time, I'll improve, and I really, really like designing everything from scratch. It's a lot of fun and interest. Sometimes I lay awake at night and I think about these sort of designs, and I cannot wait until the sun comes up to get out to the workshop to start working. That's when you know you've got a vocation, is when you cannot wait to go to work. So the steel, I've been going to the scrap yards and just picking up steel. I take a little file with me and I just sort through their piles of scrap steel. And I've noticed that the quality steel is getting harder and harder to find. Any steel is getting harder and harder to find. Everything's leaving the country. You ask these scrap yards where it's going, and they all say, well, we ship it to the coast, and it goes overseas. Because that's where all the United States manufacturing is. And there's very little steel remaining in the United States. And that's going to be a problem someday. I'm not sure when or how, but it's a raw material. It's a commodity. And if you have it around, I can take a knife today, and if I decide that it doesn't need to be a knife anymore, I can put it in a pile and we can melt it down, and maybe with a couple other knives we can make something else out of it. A plate, a fork. Who knows? Whatever we can make out of steel, we can remake steel. It's fluid. Steel is a liquid that flows very slowly at room temperature. That's what you always have to remember in metalworking. But all of our steel is going out of the country, and it's not going to be laying around. And that is going to be a problem. It's certainly getting to be a problem for me. Raw steel is about 30 cents a pound right now. And they don't care if you're buying a pound of what's called structural steel, which is mild steel. It's the very lowest grade of steel. It has very little carbon in it. It's very soft. It makes a pretty decent knife, I think, because you can sharpen it very easy. It goes dull pretty quick, but as long as you're not, chopping logs with it. If you're doing something like you're skinning a rabbit, a squirrel, or a deer, if you're skinning a rabbit, you can sharpen that thing to razor sharpness in about 2 minutes, and then do a whole rabbit. If you're doing a deer, you're probably going to have to stop maybe twice and resharpen that knife. Whereas a high carbon steel knife, well, that would, that lasts. You might go a year between sharpenings on that bad boy. But when you do have to sharpen it, you better pretty much plan to be sharpening it all day. Because it's hard. It's rock hard, and, a lot of people even have to use specialized equipment to sharpen some of those blades, like your kitchen knives and whatnot. Because you can't do it by hand. The thing about that low-end structural steel is that's the steel that most civilizations and nations had available to them up until about the 17th century in the industrial age, and that was about the best that people could do. The Arabs had Damascene steel for a while, and then the Indians, the actual Indians in India, they where steel may have even originated. They had some really good quality stuff, which they then exported the technology to China. But that was where the really good steel came from. If you were in Europe, you did not normally have access to that good of steel. And the other problem with steel working and the sword making is that you're going to duplicate a sword, and a sword maker in the Middle Ages, that was the pinnacle of the blacksmith profession. And you would generally work for a king or a governor of some place, and you do nothing but pump out swords. And you might pump out a sword or two a month. They even had some factories going back in 14th, 15th century where a group of blacksmiths would grind out the blades and then hand them off to a master sword maker for finishing. And there's all levels of things, but you're trying to duplicate that level of expertise in your workshop today. You got to kind of focus on one or the other, and my focus is going to be on knives. But I'm doing a more variety of knives, and I've got a sword on the bench right now that is looking pretty dang good. It's going to be a showpiece. It's made out of structural steel, so if you were to whack somebody hard enough with a flat of it, it would probably wrap around their head. It would bend, but it does have an edge, and it looks pretty dang good. So it could be sold as like a prop for people at Renaissance fairs or for people who go to Comic-Con, that sort of thing. So even the low-grade steel, swords and daggers and the fantasy medieval type stuff, is still worth selling. There's still money in it. And the high-grade stuff, you'll see some of those guys that focus exclusively on the high-grade stuff. They get $7,000 to $8,000 to $9,000 for commissioned swords. I don't know who has the money to pay that much for a sword, and I'm guessing that some of these sword makers probably spend 4 months on it. If you spend 4 months on something, you dang well better get $8,000 out of it to justify the time. So, where's the steel going? It's just something to watch as you pass by the scrapyards and the junkyards and you see those giant mountains of metal. The giant mountains of metal are there because scrappers are going around and they're getting all the scrap metal and they're bringing in new shipments every day. And then once a month or so, a couple of trucks will pull into these scrapyards and load up, and off they go. And they're headed to the coast, to the nearest shipping port. Anyway, that's steel. Alright, this one new fella on our Facebook page had asked if he could hear more about off-grid living. That's his area of concern. My wife suggested that I do like a whole show on off-grid living. And I thought, well, that would be good, but I've kind of talked about it in every episode before in bits and pieces. And I thought, well, aren't people going to get kind of bored of hearing the same thing? And she says no, because you talk about it differently each time. You learn as you go, and I have new stuff to add on the various elements. Well, it being the end of the week and me being behind on the show, I don't have time to talk about a complete off-grid show. But let's talk about one aspect of it. And I think probably around episode 10 or 12 or somewhere around there, we'll dedicate a full show, maybe even a full hour to off-grid living and cover all the aspects of what we do and maybe have a pretty good photo montage of some of that. That takes a little more time to prepare, I think. And I don't even think mentally I'm prepared about it. Anyway, what I want to talk about this particular segment is power and how we get electricity in our off-grid situation. Electricity is not really a necessity. Most people are going to survive without it, but there are aspects of what I do that I need electricity for. We do have a refrigerator, and it keeps certain things cold for us. And it's in the winter. It's a food preservation technique. We've not yet mastered smoking meats and drying meats and making sausages that'll last, dried sausages and whatnot. And we don't even have a smokehouse yet. So we're ways off from that, I think, here in year two. But we keep stuff in a freezer. We have internet, of course. I do a lot of computer work for the putting together the show, and I sell all my knives for there, and various other types of marketing, and just staying in touch with people via email, forums, Facebook, you name it. The internet is a form of business for me, so it's got to be there. Plus, light in the evening. We don't need a lot of light because we don't stay up very late, but we do need a little bit of light, and so those rechargeable Ryobi lanterns are a good thing for us, and that takes power to recharge. So the necessities of electricity, the way we've arranged things, are pretty slim, but there is some still there, especially out in the workshop because I'm using a lot of heavy power tools. Now, when we first got out here, we did not have any solar power at all. We were still off grid, and that was probably the first 3 months. We had 3 truck batteries that I'd acquired somewhere. I don't know how I got them. Bought a couple, and I think some were used, and I found them here or there. And what I would do is I would charge up the array running the generator. It took about 2 hours to charge up this battery array, and then we'd recharge our phones and just trickle charge all these little devices. And it was not a very good setup because there was no input other than the generator. The generator we had back then was a big 5,000 watt monster, too big. If your generator is too big when it runs, it costs you money in gas, excess electricity that's produced that you're not actually needing. It's just burning gas for no real reason. The generators we've had since then are these 3,500 watters, and they work a lot better. They can still charge batteries. They can still do what we need, and they work great. Plus, they're smaller. They're lighter weight. They don't burn as much gasoline. I figured it out at the current price of gas to run the generator. A five gallons of gas cost me about $17-18, and I can go 19 hours on 5 gallons of gas. So it's really not that expensive for me per hour. And we rarely do we have to run a generator for a full 19 hours. Generally, when we're doing that, is because we're pumping water up into the big tanks or something like that. Normally, it's an hour a day. Now we have solar panels. We have 825 watt panels, and they're arranged up on the roof of the cabin. And I've got just a wire coming down. The power shed is external to the cabin because of the batteries. Batteries can be flammable. They can explode. Certainly, they exhale acid. If you go at any given time, if you go peek in our powerhouse, there's a degree of acid that's kind of splashed and exhaled out around these battery nodes, and that's just not really something I want in the house, both for the acid in the air and also the flammability and explosiveness. So I put the batteries external to the house. They're in a little power shed about, I guess it's about 8 feet away from the house. Not very far, but still external. And we've got 6. We have 6 volt batteries, and I have them linked in such a way that it is a 12-volt system, and that provides a fairly decent amount of power. 24. If I hooked them up into a 24-volt array, we could use our big 3,000 watt inverter. An inverter is a device that the solar panels produce DC power. Nothing in your household really runs on DC power, so you have to convert it to AC, and that's what the inverter is for. It changes it so that you can use normal devices. And when we first started putting all this together, there was a big debate. They do make DC lights, and they make DC fans and DC refrigerators, but the problem with all of those is that they're not common. You cannot run to Home Depot and buy a DC refrigerator. And you typically have to order them from specialty stores. The law of living off-grid is that anything specialty costs a lot of money. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of get scared about off-grid, is because they start looking at all these specialty methods and specialty houses. And once you do the economics of it, it scares you right off because it's just too high priced for most people. Now, the inverter we're using right now is a 12-volt inverter, and it's just a 1,500 watt truck inverter. It's like one of these little ones you buy at Tractor Supply or your auto parts store or something, and they're meant to be mounted in your vehicle and run off of a vehicle battery. They're a pretty simple affair, but they cost a lot less. I've got one in my workshop that I use. I'm using it right now. I've got one in the house that I use, and so I've got two spares. Well, due to some previous malfunctions, we had to convert over and use the 12-volt inverter in the 12-volt system. But we stopped, and I got the big inverter repaired, so we could go back to the 24-volt system. I just haven't bothered to get around to do it yet. Needs to be done. 24-volt will actually hold more power and use it more efficiently. But like everything else, summer's hit, and I'm just too busy. I'm probably the busiest unemployed person I've ever heard of. Anyway, the solar panels come in to a device called a charge controller, and the charge controller regulates the power going to the batteries. And that way, solar power is going to be on all day long. And what would happen if you weren't if you didn't have a charge controller there is that you would overcharge your batteries. And electricity equals heat. Overcharging a battery equals a lot of heat, which could equal a fire or an explosion. And those are things to be avoided when you live in a giant plywood box. Now, I have two charge controllers. I have a cheap one and a fairly expensive one. And each one is on a separate array. I went with sort of a redundant system when it came to the inputs. 4 solar panels hook up to one charge controller and come into the batteries. And then the other 4 solar panels hook up to the other charge controller, and they come in to the same battery. So the batteries are our single point of failure. They're also our weakest link. We had two more batteries, which would have given us 8 originally. But over the course of the past year and a half, some malfunctions we had. We had damaged one of them. We had a windstorm, and the original power shed was destroyed in a storm. Broke some of my solar panels. I had to replace those, and it tore up some of the batteries. The charge controller was fine. The big inverter got wet and got damaged, but it was still under warranty, so I managed to get it fixed for free. I like free. Now, but that was when we also bought some of the redundant 12-volt systems. One of the advantages of 12-volt is you can just go into any old auto parts store, buy a charger, a battery charger, and cables, and just the nitnoid stuff you need for a 12-volt system. That's an advantage of 12-volt. 24-volt, out of the same battery system, 24-volt holds a lot more power. So, there is an advantage to the 24-volt. And we are going back to the 24-volt soon. Alright, so I've probably now spent 10 minutes talking about gobbledygook to some of you, and you may not understand how this works. And others of you who do understand it may go, well, gosh, Ernie, that's just plain stupid the way you did it. Yeah, it might be. I really struggled with this. I mean, before we started with solar power, I'd always lived in on-grid homes, and electricity was just something that came from the wall socket. I didn't really ever think about it. That's one of the problems with living on-grid, is that you don't know how to do anything because there's no necessity for you to know. You can always call somebody. In fact, it's highly discouraged for you to actually try to mess with stuff. They expect you to call somebody. Well, when you've got some hodgepodge, homegrown, hillbilly system like mine, there ain't nobody to call. Okay, there ain't another Ernie sitting out there in the woods somewhere who I can call and go, hey, can you come show me how I hooked up my system? You can't do it. And I've documented some of it. I took a Sharpie and I wrote all over the inside of the walls on the power shed, showing people how it's supposed to be hooked up in case I wasn't around or something happened. But there's still only so much you can do. Okay, so how do we get power into the house? Now I've shown you how we get power from the solar panels to the batteries. How do I get power into the house? We have a very simple system. Our house is basically, it's a big plywood box. It's a frame cabin on pier and beam and with plywood on the exterior of the walls. We do not have anything on the interior of the walls. It's just plywood. And frames. You can see the treeboards that make up the frame. It is not particularly finished. It may never be particularly finished. But there's nowhere to run electrical wires. And my wife and I discussed early on, and we didn't really like the thought of electrical wires running everywhere. For one thing, both my wife and I believe that the current grid system and power system and all that is going to collapse. And even when it collapses, I'll last probably about 6 months longer than the people in the on-grid homes will in terms of having power. Because, light bulbs burn out, batteries wear out, parts break. By the grace of God, I might get by a year longer if nothing breaks. But once the grid collapses, I'm not going to be able to make my own batteries, make my own charge controller. So we built our house with the intent that while we have electricity, we'll use electricity. When we don't have electricity, ain't no problem. We roll up the extension cord and maybe use it to, tie a goat fence or something. There would be no purpose for it. Our water is gravity fed. Our heating comes from either propane or wood. The refrigeration will go by the wayside once we reach that point, but that's not too big of a hurdle. If it happens tomorrow, it'll be a little bit of a hurdle, but if it happens, a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, I hope we will have figured out how to smoke meat and preserve meats the old-fashioned way by then. There's a lot of books on it. I've got a lot of books on it. I just haven't fully grokked them yet. So the power now comes out of the inverter and it goes through a extension cord into the house. And where it comes into the house there, we have a three-way. And the refrigerator is plugged into one element of the three-way. Another line of the three-way goes up into the loft where I sleep because Ernie likes a fan at night. When it's 90 degrees outside at night, I like a fan. A fan is good. And the other one goes over to a little desk area where we have the computers, the chargers, etc., etc. And so it's that simple. It's just an extension cord. And I've seen big off-grid homes that have very complex power systems that basically mimic the on-grid system. They're just providing their own power. We never built that, and I don't know that if I won the lottery tomorrow, I probably still would not change my system that much. I would get more batteries. If I had more money, I would get more batteries. You can never go wrong with having batteries. Right now, in the heat of the summer, our refrigerator runs a ridiculous amount of time. Even more so because I've got children, and if you have children and a refrigerator, you know how they like to open the door and stare into it all day long. And so it's never cold, it's always running, and that just eats up our power. That actually, and then you add that to it's hot, and so pretty much there's 2-3 fans running in the house. So we get into a position about every 2-3 days where in order to bring us back up to a full power state, I've got to run the generator for about 2 hours. And that's not great. I would like to have, we have all the power input in the world that we need, but we do not have the battery life to store it. We will, the other day, it was kind of a hot day, but it was very cloudy. We had a lot of cloud cover, and so it was just ridiculously hot and humid all day long. No rain, just the misery of having a cloud system park on top of you. So we ran fans, and it was still hot, and there was no solar input. So by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the inverter started whining. It has a little alarm bell. It's because it's meant for a truck. They don't want to let you run your battery down so you can't start your truck. So at a certain low voltage point, it will make an alarm sound. So it started making an alarm sound at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I had to go run the generator for about 6 hours and charge the battery bank. And I was not pleased about having to do that. Cost money. Everything costs money. To live off grid, even living off grid, costs some money in daily operating expenses. We could cut it down a little bit here and there. We've been timing things better. My wife has a washing machine, and we have to run the generator to use that washing machine. And so we've timed it a little better that she will use the washing machine, and if I need to start the generator for that purpose, or if I need to start the generator to charge batteries, I will also have all my workshop tools and everything else, my work for that day, lined up so that I can go rush right over, and we put the generator halfway between the workshop and the house. So with extension cords, we can power both locations and use the same gas. So that way I don't have to spend half a day running it for one purpose and then move it and run the half a day for the other. We can run it for half of the day and suit both purposes. So I know that sounds extraordinarily simple, and y'all are like, well, Ernie, what took you so long to think of that? It's just life. If you've never lived off grid, these are things you don't normally have to think about. Where's your power coming from? You just flip a switch and there's power, and you don't think about electricity until that monthly bill comes in. Well, here we have to think about it every minute of every day. Except in the winter. Oddly enough, in the winter, our batteries stay on at full power three-fourths of the day and the night. And because we're not running fans, the refrigerator doesn't use much power at all. In the winter, last winter, we had a refrigerator plugged in, and it didn't eat up any power. Before we had a refrigerator, we had an ice chest. And so I would run every morning into town, or at least sometime during that day, into town, to the little convenience store, and I'd get myself a Gatorade, a cup of ice, and 2 bags of ice. And the 2 bags of ice, I think that was about $2.50 total. And I would bring that home, and I would dump it into the ice chest. And when we bought milk and cheese and sour cream, which are some of the dairy products our refrigerator pretty much is geared only towards supporting dairy products, right? Which is kind of silly, but there you have it. So the milk and the cheese and the sour cream, we would just put in this ice chest with ice in it. And I had to do that. If I stayed on top of it, I did it every day. And otherwise, I would do it every 2 days, every 3 days. And everything stayed pretty cold in that. Now, it was a $2.50 charge about every time you had to go get ice. But that, is that really that much worse than running the generator for an hour or two? I don't think so. So when we got the refrigerator, we got just a normal refrigerator that uses normal type power. And it in the winter, it's fine. In the summer, though, it's too hot, and the refrigerator just stays on too much. Now, we have a chest freezer I picked up off of Craigslist for real cheap, and it's not in the best condition. Looks like somebody may have beaten their head against it quite a bit, or beat somebody else's head against it. It's hard to tell. But the purpose of the chest freezer. So look at your refrigerator. If you're where you can either see a refrigerator or think about a refrigerator, now picture yourself opening the door. Where does all the cold air go? Well, cold air flows downhill, so it's going to spill right out onto the floor every time you open the door. A refrigerator is a very poor design, a stand-up refrigerator. So we bought this chest freezer, and we're going to do a conversion on it. They make these little external thermostats. So I cut the wires on the compressor for the existing freezer and disconnect it from its own thermostat and hook it up to this external thermostat. And it will kick on that compressor and keep it somewhere between 35 and 50 degrees, just like a normal fridge. So it basically converts a freezer, like one of them, lift top, reach down inside freezers, into a fridge. Now, the value of this is that when you open up that top, the cold air stays in there with all your stuff. And these things, when we had this running, we froze some stuff in it, and then we unplugged it, and that stuff stayed frozen for over a week inside that freezer. And that was just, now granted, the temperatures were only in the 70s back then when we first got that thing, but, that's still pretty good. Certainly better than our solution now. So we just need to get an external thermostat to hook onto that, and we're good to go. And that will save a lot of power. So that's our electricity around here. We don't have really any lights and stuff. We use the Ryobi lanterns with a battery. And so every morning, everybody takes all their batteries and they put them onto this big charging bank, those little Ryobi batteries, like what you use on your drill, cordless drill. And that, we have a Ryobi fan. We have two Ryobi fans. My wife uses one and the boy uses one. And I use just a regular plug-in-the-wall fan. And then we've got, I think, 4 of those little lanterns. So of an evening, when it's dark, we just turn on those lanterns because we charge the batteries during the day. That works out pretty well. So that's our power solution. It's not real sophisticated. It's not real complicated. I think that if I were to walk anybody through it, they could do it too. Heck, I didn't even know the difference between AC and DC when I started this, and there's various people that gave me advice, and it just worked out. It worked out real well, and we've been running this way for about 1.5 years now, and I still make modifications periodically, but it's really where I want it. The batteries are really our only deficiency. We just need a bigger battery bank. So that's how we do power. Well, a little bit longer show this week than what we've had in the past, but we're done now. Episode 5 is in the can. So I appreciate y'all showing up to listen. It's a blessing to have y'all follow me and listen, and sometimes I'm amazed that I have anything at all to offer to the world, but with the grace of God, that I guess there's still some people that have not yet done some of these things and thought about some of these things that we talk about, and I hope it's of interest and of use to you. Check out the Knife Shop this week. We've got a few new items up and going for sale. Also, as always, you can contact me via email or any other method you choose to talk about custom orders. We're building up a little bit of a waiting list right now. If you want anything, you're going to be about 3 weeks out. But we're getting there. We're whittling away on it every day. And here it is, a beautiful morning out here in the workshop, and I just cannot wait to get to grinding some metal. Anyhow, y'all take care, and I hope the Lord blesses y'all this week, and y'all keep being y'all.